This week on Vaticano, Pope Francis comes back from his apostolic journey to Colombia. Discover with us why this trip has been considered one of the most important foreign visits of the Pope. The Catholic Church in Korea, get an inside look into the nation that was evangelized only by lay people. For this and more, Vaticano starts now. On September the 11th, Pope Francis came back from his 20th apostolic journey, this one to Colombia. The 5-day trip will certainly go down in history as one of the most significant trips made by the Pope. Our EWTN and ASI Prensa envoy, Álvaro de Juana, explains why.
We at ASA Prensa and EWTN have accompanied Pope Francis on his 5-day journey to Colombia, a trip about which the Pope himself had said that it would happen only on condition that a peace agreement was signed by the local Colombian government and the FARC rebel group, who, as we all know, caused many innocent victims for lots of years. The deal was finally reached, and so Pope Francis was finally able to visit the country.
In November of last year, the government signed a historic peace deal with the FARC rebel group. The deal put an end to a conflict that had lasted for more than 50 years and killed around 260,000 people. This peace process has also been supported all along by the Catholic Church and by Pope Francis himself.
Over there for 5 days, he spoke of forgiveness, of healing the wounds, and of reconciliation. For example, one of the most moving encounters we could witness was one of praying and reconciliation. It took place in Villavicencio, a town about 34 miles from Bogotá, the capital of the country. There gathered victims of the FARC rebel group and some of its members. Very poor people. It's a very poor area. And the Pope himself was moved by the testimony of 3 victims. The Pope spoke about starting over, about avoiding revenge. He invited all of them to make peace, to forget, if possible, what had happened, and to start over. To forgive the murderers, because, he said, that's what Christ did, and many saints and martyrs.
One of the highlights of the papal trip to Colombia was the beatification of 2 national martyrs, Bishop Jesus Emilio Jaramillo Monsalve and Father Pedro Maria Ramirez Ramos. Both of them were killed because of their faith. This apostolic trip didn't end without some adventure.
The Pope never ceases to surprise us. He's always doing something extraordinary, and we have to follow him closely to be able to capture every moment. This time it was soon after landing here in Cartagena, this wonderful place visited by lots of tourists from all over the world. The Pope was in the Pope-mobile, and he stood up as usual to start the tour among the faithful who were squeezing their way through the crowd to see him. He wanted to take one of the children coming toward him, but he lost his balance and bumped into the window of the car, injuring part of his cheekbone and eyebrow. Later, on the plane, the head of security of the Vatican was telling us that that particular Pope-mobile had been made in Colombia, not in the Vatican. So the measurements were not the same, and that's why the accident happened. The distance between the window and the Pope was not the same as in the Vatican Pope-mobile. There was a little bit of blood, but the head of security, who's always with the Pope, simply took out a tissue and cleaned it. And the Pope, smiling as always, got on with the rest of his day without any changes in the schedule.
Pope Francis' apostolic journey to Colombia lasted 5 days, from the 6th to the 11th of September, bringing the Church 2 new blesseds and a strong message of peace to Colombia and to neighboring Venezuela. The next papal trip is scheduled for November the 27th to December the 2nd. This time, the Pope will visit 2 Asian countries, Bangladesh and Myanmar. On Monday, August the 28th, the Holy See Press Office announced that Pope Francis will travel to Bangladesh and Myanmar from November the 27th to December the 2nd of this year. There are a lot of reasons for the Pope to visit these 2 Asian countries, and to learn more about his upcoming trip, we met with Father Bernardo Cervelera, an expert on the Church in Asia.
I've
been to both Bangladesh and Myanmar. What I can say is that they are very enthusiastic communities in their faith. Their faith is to them what gives meaning to their life, what gives it color and dignity. They are also minorities, though, sometimes oppressed, sometimes persecuted. And this strengthens their being Catholic, their being part of an entity that's international, universal.
Last May, the leader of Myanmar, Mrs. Aung San Suu Kyi, visited the Vatican. The visit was an historic one, as the two countries established diplomatic ties for the first time in their histories.
In their own ways, both countries recognize the Church. Let's not forget that Myanmar re-established diplomatic ties only a few months ago. And as for Bangladesh, ties have existed for a very long time. In my opinion, the Pope's visit will focus more on the fact that the future of these countries depend on coexistence and not on conflict.
During the cardinal creating consistory in November of 2016, the Pope appointed the first ever cardinal for Bangladesh, Archbishop Patrick de Rosario of Dhaka. The Holy Father follows very closely the Church in this region. Several times he's raised his voice up for the protection of the Rohingya Muslim ethnic group that's being persecuted in Myanmar.
The Pope has spoken about this Muslim minority because nobody likes it. The people of Myanmar reject it, and the Buddhist fundamentalist groups don't like it either. But they are also rejected by Bangladesh, a country with a Muslim majority, because they don't want them in their country. So these people don't have a country. They are migrants, in the true sense of the term. They have nowhere to stay and rest. And so the Pope defends them to let Christians and Muslims know that we need to help people not on the basis of their confession, or their wealth, or their abilities, but only and simply because they're human beings.
The Rohingya ethnic group is experiencing a catastrophe. Being Indo-Aryan and Muslim, they are not recognized as citizens of Myanmar. Since 2012, some 125,000 Rohingya have been displaced, and more than 100,000 have fled Myanmar by sea. The Catholics in Bangladesh and Myanmar are also a minority. They sympathize with the Rohingya and understand that only by protecting and recognizing the small ethnic groups will there be peace and progress in these countries.
The Catholic minority is itself made up of many other small groups. Actually, Bangladeshi Catholics come mainly from tribes, from the Garo and Oraon groups, and many others. These tribes are very often the subject of exploitation on the part of the majority and of people without scruples. The same in Myanmar. There too, most Catholics come from tribes, the Chin, Kachin, Karen, and many others. So, in this respect, the situation in both countries is the same. That is, the Catholic minority is in itself composed of many other ethnic minorities. So when the Pope speaks about defending minorities, he's also defending Catholics.
Father Bernardo says that the Catholic Church is an instrument of peace in this region. The Christian communities are a good example of peaceful coexistence between different types of ethnic groups. Besides building peace, Christians also give their contributions to the growth of the economy in these countries. The Catholic Church runs hospitals, schools, cooperatives, dormitories, and other social and cultural projects. These activities are not just open to Catholics, but to everyone, Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists alike. Thanks for watching. Get ready to take a look at Holy See diplomacy in action. Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano.
Mr. President, the Holy See remains firm and determined to contribute to the success of this humanitarian challenge and making sure that in the future the cluster munition will never be a cause of human suffering. We owe this to the too many victims of the past and to prevent further ones.
This was a piece of the statement read by the First Secretary of the Holy See Mission Geneva during the 7th meeting of state parties to the Convention on Cluster Munitions that took place early September here at the United Nations in Geneva. He also stated that it is imperative to view the prohibitions under the Convention through a humanitarian lens. This prompted our question if he believes that the Convention currently does not view this through a humanitarian lens.
The Holy See was a huge part in the entire Oslo process, the process which led to the Convention on Cluster Munition, precisely because it wants to bring its moral authority to these processes which are against use of indiscriminate weapons and every kind of unbalanced suffering which is led to people, more particularly to civilians in case of war. So it's precisely a humanitarian lens that the Holy See use to see this kind of serious problem, and is a very serious concern of the Holy See and of the traditionalist position of the Holy See in warfare.
Cluster bombs dropped from an aircraft open in mid-air, dispensing hundreds of submunitions over an area roughly the size of a football field. Because they often fail to explode on impact, they pose a serious threat to civilians, both during attacks and afterwards. The Convention is an international instrument dedicated to ending the human suffering caused by cluster munitions. We wanted to know if progress have been achieved since the Convention entered into force 7 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Convention on Cluster Munitions is one, I would say, example of how these treaties can facilitate progress. More countries reporting about the hundreds of millions of explosive submunitions that have been destroyed. That's a direct result of being a party to this treaty. You have many kilometers of land that has been cleared and plans that have been developed to clear other areas. That's a direct result of this treaty. And indeed more, I would say, attention and resources being devoted to victim assistance. So I think those are concrete examples and goals that have been achieved through this treaty.
As of August this year, a total of 119 countries have signed or have agreed to the Convention. The Apostolic Nuncio to the UN tells us why the Holy See participates in this particular convention.
The Holy See participates in every international activity that is aimed to diminish use of violent means, especially in the field of cluster munition. The Holy See is active because they cause a massive suffering of human beings, and they are used indiscriminately.
The central provision of the Convention on Cluster Munitions is a ban, making it illegal to produce, use, stockpile and transfer cluster munitions. One objective is the universalization of the Convention.
By universalization in this process, we mean the attempt to make the most number, if not all the numbers of the countries in the world, to sign and ratify a convention, especially this convention, of course. So the more states, the more countries accede to this kind of conventions, the more this becomes an universal law, which is, of course, an universal humanitarian law, not to use cluster munition in case of warfare.
The Convention confirmed that 28 states parties have completed the destruction of nearly 1.4 million stockpiled cluster munitions, containing more than 175 million submunitions. This represents the destruction of 97% of all cluster munitions and 98% of all submunitions under the treaty worldwide.
In a few moments, we'll be back with more on Vaticano. More on Vaticano begins now. The Catholic Church is, by its essence, by its divine design, a universal church. Before his ascension to heaven, Jesus Christ left his commandment to his disciples to go to the ends of the earth and preach the gospel to all nations. And over the course of 2,000 years, the Catholic Church has indeed spread to all continents, so that today there are faithful that profess Jesus Christ as their Lord in every language. True evangelization does not erase culture. It doesn't force people to refuse local customs. When a nation accepts the Word of God, the Church is reborn, absorbing the future of the local people. In different parts of the world, Mass is celebrated differently. Every nation represents God and the divine world in its own way. On earth as it is in heaven is the title of a special exhibition that the Vatican Museums are holding at the Braccio Carlo Magno Hall on the left side of St. Peter's Basilica. This exhibit is the fruit of the collaboration between the Vatican Museums and the Korean Martyrs Exaltation Committee of the Archdiocese of Seoul, South Korea.
So this is only part of a different project together. I mentioned before the 2012 exhibit in Seoul with the Renaissance masterpieces like Leonardo, Michelangelo and Raphael that we exposed there. And on another side we have several projects of restoration with them, with our ethnological museum. And this is the first time that the Korean expose in the heart of the Vatican city-state their own history.
For Father Matthias Young-Yup-Hur, the spokesperson of the Archdiocese of Seoul, it's not just an exhibition, it's a journey through the 230 years of the Catholic Church in South Korea.
This is not only a very good chance for us to introduce the history of the Korean Catholic Church, but also the culture and the special characteristics of Korea itself as a country. So I believe that this is a very good introduction to our Korean culture for the whole world. Also, we wanted to deliver a message of peace. As you all know, there is a nuclear crisis going on in the Korean peninsula, and through this exhibition we wanted to deliver a peace message, especially to our brothers and sisters in the north. We want them to know that nobody on this peninsula wants war, but it's peace that we really want. That's the message we wanted to share with all the people through this exhibition, and we hope that all of them will pray for us, for peace on the Korean peninsula.
The exhibition started on September the 9th and will run through November the 17th. There are 188 artifacts, including books, crosses, images, and documents that tell the story of the important role that the Catholic Church has played in the development of Korean society.
In 1783, a lay person called Lee Seung-hoon went to Beijing to study, and he found Catholic books. He read them and discovered that their message was very important. So he brought the books back to Korea, and a group of Korean scholars began to study them, and they discovered Catholicism.
Lee Seung-hoon was baptized in Beijing in January of 1784. When he returned to Korea, he baptized his friends, Young Yak-jeon, Young Yak-young, and Kwan Il-shin. This is how the first Catholic community in Korea was born, without any missionary priests, only through the work of newly converted lay people.
These scholars saw that the Catholic faith is a good faith, so they decided to spread it throughout Korea, and the number of believers increased. Soon, however, this group of scholars found out that it was not a very good way to have only lay people among the faithful, as during the process of studying, some mistakes were made and there were misunderstandings. So they decided to ask for a missionary, for a priest, to come to Korea.
And in 1794, a priest from the Beijing diocese became the first missionary to Korea. The persecution against Catholics began suddenly. As early as 1785, the government started to ban religious gatherings. But despite a century-long persecution, Korean Catholics continued to keep their faith. In 1844, Korea saw its first native priest, Saint Andrew Tim Taegon. During the Joseon dynasty, Christians were persecuted and many of them executed. Andrew Kim Taegon was one of the several thousand Christians who were martyred during this time. The young priest was tortured and beheaded at the age of 25, only 2 years after starting his priestly ministry. These cups were once the burial urns of these martyrs. This cross represents the 102 Korean martyrs that died with Andrew Kim Tae-gon. On May 6, 1984, while Pope John Paul II was visiting Korea, he canonized these brave Korean Catholics.
With 230 years of history of Catholicism in Korea, we believe that although we have been through all these persecutions, we didn't die because of them, but we prospered. And the martyrs have become a good role model for all believers. So, I think this is the best fruit that has appeared in the country of Korea.
Nowadays, the Catholic Church of Korea follows the brave example of its ancestors, bringing dignity and peace to modern Korean society.
For sure, to show how can evangelization can bring to peace and to more evangelization, and so even persecutions are not an obstacle to that.
Diplomatic ties between the Holy See and Korea began in 1947. With this bull, Pope Pius XI sent the first apostolic delegate, Father Patrick James Byrne, to Korea. Pope Francis visited Korea in 2014, a year after the 50th anniversary of the establishment of full diplomatic relations between the country and the Holy See. Unfortunately, since 1945, the Korean peninsula has been suffering the division into two opposed political systems and ideology. There have been attempts at reunification, but to this day they've been unsuccessful. At the end of May, His Eminence Hyginus Kim Hee-jung, Archbishop of Gwangju and President of the Korean Bishops' Conference, was at the Vatican with a special mission.
Our new president, Timothy Moon Jae-in, sent me as a special envoy to ask for a prayer for encouragement and support for the reunification of North and South Korea.
The reunification of Korea will never be achieved without a guarantee of peace. The words of Archbishop Hyginus Kim Hee-jung today sound very relevant.
It seems to me that, in spite of North Korea's missiles, what we must do is seek constant dialogue. We must seek dialogue to bring this situation to a normal state. There's no other way. War is useless, under any circumstance.
Since North Korea's first nuclear test in 2006, the UN Security Council has passed some resolutions to impose economic sanctions that are still in force today.
Even when a powerful country says that because North Korea doesn't stop sending missiles, then we have to stop seeking dialogue, then the answer is no. We must always seek dialogue, even when that happens.
The Archbishop sees the Vatican as a politically and ideologically neutral state that can be a mediator in the potential negotiations. On September 2nd, Pope Francis received in private audience the Korean Council of Religious Leaders that were in Rome on an interreligious pilgrimage. The delegation was made up of Catholics, Protestants, Buddhists, Won Buddhists, Confucians, and representatives of the native Korean religions. In his address, the Holy Father supported the position of Archbishop Kim Hee-jung and told the audience that the religious leaders are called to be heralds of peace, proclaiming and embodying a non-violent style, a style of peace, with words clearly different from the narrative of fear, and with gestures opposed to the rhetoric of hatred.
There are about 60 different religions in Korea, but we want to create a peaceful coexistence. We cannot accept their faith, but we want to respect their values. We must respect their values. And this is the only way to a peaceful coexistence.
There are more than 5,000 priests and around 6 million Catholics in South Korea. As for North Korea, we have no information about whether or not there are some priests or religious people left in the country. For the last 20 years, the Archdiocese of Seoul has provided humanitarian aid to North Korea, and since 1995, the church in Seoul and Changchun Church in Pyongyang have renewed a non-official agreement to pray for peace. There are 57 parishes and about 52,000 Catholics currently living in North Korea who keep hoping that their life on earth will be as it is in heaven. Join us next week on Vaticano and discover the life story of Blessed Maria Dolores Sopeña. Thanks for watching.